Thanks, Trevor. Yes, so this story begins about 18 months ago in Tenerife. Here we are at the end of a new field course, having successfully done it with no students injured, everyone's had a good time, the assessments are successful and everyone's happy. So we think we're going to be able to dine out on this work for at least some years to come. Here we were in Mount Tady National Park, and we'd had to design a field course that was relatively light in terms of kit and equipment, so it was mainly observational, and it had worked within the learning outcomes that we had set. And then, of course, this happened. I was sitting in a meeting and my phone started lighting up with colleagues telling me, aren't you due to pay the balance for your Tenerife field course at the end of this week? And in a way, we were lucky that Tenerife was one of the first places to be affected, because it helped us to take decisions really quickly and gave us a bit more time to plan and think and change our minds. So we were due to take both our level 4 and level 5 students to Tenerife in May this year. And we ended up splitting those into two, and we're currently running, so I'm not normally able to come to this event because I'm normally running a UK field course this week. We are currently running a virtual field course for level 4 students and the self-directed field course for level 5 students right now, so I'm hoping my phone's not going to go off any minute. We were fortunate that the field course that we were intending to go on was already quite self-directed. I inherited this field course and I inherited the location, so I ended up taking 20 students there last year without having ever been to any of the locations before. So I had to adapt the assessment in order to make sure I was comfortable that we were going to be able to do that. So students identified the topics of interest to themselves at each location, and then the main bit of the work was reading about those and reflecting on those in their evening in order to write their field journal. We were also lucky that, in hindsight, that some of our students had chosen not to come to Tenerife for a range of different reasons. And so here's my colleague Alice with my student Matilda in the estuary in Essex last September at this time of year, looking at harbour seal populations, and I'm sure Alice is talking about persistent organic pollutants in the marine environment. So we already had a couple of models that we could use and adapt. So when coming to design a completely self-directed field course, it wasn't such a big step forward for the students to not only determine what interested them most at the locations we'd been to, but actually which locations they wanted to go to in its entirety. We were also pretty lucky that this field course sits within a broader research skills and methods module. So the students had already met many of the learning outcomes through the other assessments that had taken place before the field course. And that gave us a bit of extra flexibility. So what do they do? Well, we gave them a full briefing and teaching sessions via Blackboard Collaborate. That took place 2 weeks ago. The students then spent about 10 days doing their site selection, planning, risk assessment, and that was an iterative process with regular drop-in sessions. We then did an optional field visit that I ran last Saturday, so that students who wanted to come and do a socially distanced walk with me to take them through that process could do. And I'm quite fortunate that I live relatively near some nice landscapes that are also near a train station, so students could all get themselves there if they chose to do so. The students then take field notes in real time. They also have to do species accounts, very similar to what we've heard earlier, of at least 2 species, but ideally 1 a day. And then the bulk of the work is the field journal explaining how the reading they've done helps them to understand what they've seen and to reflect on that planning process. They also have to explicitly tell us how what they've seen interacts with the modules that we've taught them in the first 2 years of their degree. And this week we're having evening meetings via Zoom to try to build that, as best we can, field course culture, to talk about what we've seen, what we've done, and students are sharing photos, sharing videos. We've got flocks of starlings, we've got foxes playing in someone's garden to try to teach each other what we're all seeing. So these are some of the locations where the students are going. They had to map where they were going to be going in as part of their risk assessment process. Many of them have been pretty conservative. They haven't gone too far from home. In a way, that's quite nice for me because it meant doing kind of approving their risk assessments was relatively straightforward. Mainly, they are local wildlife trust sites and nature reserves. Someone's going for a walk along the River Thames at Runnymede, so relatively suburban environments. So I'm going to take us through what we did at the weekend. We met here at the Ashridge Estate, and I led the students on a walk of about 10 k's around the Ashridge Estate in order to really show the ones who weren't very confident about what was required, what we were going to do. So that also helped me to take me through the risk assessment process. Ironically, this is my regular 10k running route, so it was quite funny doing a formal risk assessment for something I'm normally doing, wearing a pair of shorts. No hills on a scale of Tenerife, but there are some interesting landscapes that we got to go on for the students who chose to. So here we are looking towards Tring railway station, and you can see in the distance there's a combine harvester. So we zoom in on that, or rather walk towards that, and you can see a agri-environment scheme field margin. That was great because that interacts with a bit of teaching that the students have had from us. So we were able to expect them to know what they were looking at, and they've had some experience of that. We had a lovely
a little less than a minute to go.
Day in terms of weather, so the bees and the butterflies were doing their thing as well. And that then kicked us into an interesting conversation, again connecting two bits of teaching they've had before about the use of pesticides and agri-environment schemes. So we're expecting students to observe in real time, use their notebooks to record and capture, use their phones, use video, and then to get back to their desk in the evening and put that academic gloss on what they've seen through accessing the primary literature, to really be able to tell us some insights that connect the literature, their field experiences, and their prior learning. So another example, we saw some mammals. The mouse was harder to photograph than the rabbit. It wasn't doing terribly well, so let's focus on the mouse. That kicked us into some interesting conversations about hedgerows and their conservation benefits and importance for small mammals. So again, an example of what we would expect students to do, having seen the mouse, photographed it, they now need to go back and identify it and tell us some stories about why that's interesting. And our last example is a bit sad, really. These are ash trees with a blue spot on. I don't know whether they are diseased or whether they've just labelled all of the ash trees on the estate. But of course, that leads to some interesting work, both in terms of the science of estimating mortality rates from ash dieback, but also about the costs and kind of looking at this through the lens of ecosystem services that could be lost, which again is convenient for me because that's something I've explicitly taught them in one of their second year modules. So what have we lost? The thing we're really struggling to replicate is that feeling of community that you get with a residential field course. We're doing our best with our evening meetings and our sharing of photos and resources, but that common purpose of having had a long day in the field, coming back to the hotel and reading and writing and annotating maps and discussing things is something that we're just, not managing to do, particularly as I think some of us forget. I mean, I've been doing this all summer in meetings for multiple hours a day. Lots of our students haven't, maybe the occasional house party or something like that, but the norms of interacting on what, at the moment, whatever software we're using just aren't quite there yet. So we're struggling to get them to engage in real time. Other things we've lost, definitely a different voice. It's nice to have someone talking that's not me. And we've lost that sense of novelty. Big things, big wow moments, and certainly from a geographical point of view, most of the south of England, as my geologist colleagues would say, is covered in green stuff. So it's just not as easy to get them excited about geology than it would be standing on top of a volcano. We've gained a few things as well, and I think that local element, and that small scale element is really nice. This is a bee taken in my garden, and it led me to reflect that because of the teaching I did last year, I knew more about short fin pilot whales off the coast of Tenerife than I did about the bees in my garden. So I need to take my own medicine and start reading some papers about bumblebees in gardens. So I posed the question, is this a new model for local exploration and understanding? Well, no, it's not a new model. I'm sure lots of people are doing something similar, but it is a useful model. And I think even when we're all vaccinated and standing back on the volcano in Tenerife, we will want to keep this as part of the curriculum somewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's just myself presenting here today. Clare couldn't make it today. It's my first involvement with the EFL symposium, so it's great to be here. I really feel like I've found my people. It's really reassuring to hear how other people have been wrestling with these issues of putting field courses online. So yeah, this is just really interesting for me. The field course I'm going to talk about is maybe a bit different from some of the others we've been hearing about this morning, and that it's not so much about survey techniques or species ID or that kind of thing, but it's much more issues based. It's about conservation conflicts and how students can engage with the discussion around these kinds of conflicts and issues. So the name of the course is Conservation Issues in Scotland. It's a level 3 course, and we typically have 20 to 30 students taking part. I haven't reproduced all of the learning outcomes here, but underpinning all of them is an exploration of the conflicts between conservation and competing land uses. And in this case, that is things like farming, grouse moor management, commercial forestry, and so on. So students are very aware of the theory of some of the conflicts that go on in the Scottish uplands. They've covered things like some of the issues with grouse moor management, but usually they haven't actually encountered the reality of what it's like being out in these places, speaking to people that are responsible for managing the uplands, and really having that sort of visceral interaction with these environments. So aware of the theory, but not reality. So our sort of study site is the Cairngorms National Park. We visit 7 or 8 different sites around the park where we interact with land managers and stakeholders from various government agencies, NGOs and private estates. So sort of the full range of people involved with land management. Some of you might be familiar with the Cairngorms area. So we spend a full 8 days travelling around, visiting different sites. Each site and each day is devoted to a particular topic. So we start off with a background to national parks. We have a look at the ecological restoration project at Cairngorms Connect, a bit about commercial forestry, the beaver reintroduction programme, which is going on down in Perthshire. That's always a popular one. Modern estate management, how estates are diversifying. Deer management, often in relation to woodland regeneration. One of the more controversial ones is, of course, grouse moor management and, of course, farming. So we get out to some really great places, and this is this typical scenes from our field course where we're meeting up with different stakeholders, and they're sort of telling us how land is managed, what the conflicts are. But what we're trying to do is to get students to engage with the people that we meet and the issues, and really sort of get to the underlying drivers underpinning these conflicts. So we're trying to assess them on their engagement with all this, their contribution to the discussions that we have, both in the field, and also we have briefings and debriefings before and afterwards. We want to see them interacting with stakeholders. We don't want them just sort of standing there and listening. We want them to ask incisive questions, and we want them to really understand the issues and the drivers underpinning the issues as well. So we were all set to go for this in April, and then of course in March our beloved COVID-19 hit, and we had to decide how are we going to achieve these same learning outcomes in some kind of virtual arrangement. So we decided we would stick with this format of having a topic every day devoted to a single topic. And what we did was we pulled together material for each of those topics using a range of sources and media. So that was written sources such as papers and reports, newspaper articles, but also things like podcasts, YouTube clips. So a range of media. Once they had worked through that material, we had formulated open-ended questions to facilitate the kind of critical thought and discussion that we wanted to see coming from them. We then set up a discussion board in our VLE, which is Blackboard, for students to post their responses to our questions and assess their engagement with the issues. So this is a sample content folder from our Beaver reintroduction topic. So they have to work through, there's a YouTube clip, a radio interview, and a paper, and then followed by some questions. So we, as I said, we wanted to engage, assess them on their degree of engagement. So we had the full range of responses. To get an A, a student had to sort of engage consistently through the day, as well as answer the questions, provide evidence of further research, and widening the scope of the discussion through being able to give insightful comments, and also interact with other class members, which is something that I will come back to. So we had the full sort of scale right the way down to, I don't think we had any E's, but a few people just made a single post a day and answered the questions briefly, but didn't really go beyond that. I'd be really interested to hear in other people's experience of assessing engagement, because it's something that we do quite a lot, and it's something that's actually quite difficult to quantify. So just a sample answer, I'm not going to read all this out, but this person has, this is just a single post, but she'd made many posts over the course of the week. There was consistent evidence of researching the topic. She'd been able to look at sort of the underlying drivers of the beaver conflicts, and she's provided links to a paper here, and she'd also interacted with class members. Some people just were only able to contribute the answers to the questions we'd asked, and yeah, hadn't really followed up with any more discussion or research. So did this actually work? Were we able to engage the students in these issues using this discussion board format? Well, both from our own observations and the feedback we had from the students, this certainly did encourage the sort of critical thinking and reflection that we were looking for. So once all the responses are posted, students are able to sort of refer back to those, see what their classmates have written, maybe reconsider their viewpoints, and sort of come back to it with alternatives or new insights and so on. So we really could see that the critical thinking coming out. And through that process of reflection, they were able to gain a sort of detailed understanding of these sort of quite complex issues like land management, also land ownership, and how these things interact to produce the sort of issues that we're seeing. They really liked the variety of media types that aided engagement, and I think kept them interested at a time when they maybe could have just, you know, started to coast along a bit. On these discussion boards, they enjoyed the opportunity to improve their writing skills by using that sort of accessible style of writing to express their opinions. So it was something a bit different from the sort of standard essay format that's often used as a written assessment. And these online materials we've created we'll definitely use in future. Hopefully we'll be doing the live course again, maybe next year, who knows. But we'll certainly use these materials going forwards as a basis for them to get their sort of understanding consolidated. And I should say that this the use of the discussion boards was definitely, we often saw students sort of engaging with each other through that medium, having, you know, a bit of a debate, sometimes heated at times because these are controversial issues, and a bit of banter as well. So I think this was the closest that we could get to that more sort of social experience, you know, the fieldwork culture that we've been talking about, was able to be not, of course, replicated, but something approaching it. Got it. Was we were able to see that through the use of the discussion boards. Well, what lessons did we learn? How would we do it differently in future? Well, one important thing is to address the internet access and connection issues. Some students having to share bandwidth with other family members and also devices. And actually, I saw this morning there's a article in The Guardian saying that during lockdown, a quarter of students were not able to access online learning, which I could maybe post the link to in the chat. So that's certainly something to be aware of. We need to account for students in different time zones. We had a couple of people in Canada, so we need to set up the discussion board so that the students have to answer the questions before they can see other people's contributions, which is actually possible to do. So then if people couldn't log in until later in the day, they wouldn't sort of be disadvantaged by everybody having already said everything there was to say. We also, for the same reason, want to assess the answers to questions and contribution to the ongoing discussion separately. We'd also like to include some synchronous online session with our stakeholders, get them in to talk to the students, and maybe synchronous sessions with the students themselves too. And like we've been saying since the start of today, although this has had some advantages, you just cannot reproduce seeing what happens on the ground in a virtual field course. There's no substitute for talking to a gamekeeper, seeing what actually happens on these estates through a discussion board. So, yeah, thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to hearing your feedback.
Great. Louise, thank you very much. That was excellent and very clear too. Okay, so we've just got the third of the three presentations coming up next, and while Catherine brings that one up, I'll just mention it'll be Wendy Harris, and it's looking at the speedy development of alternative practicals during COVID. So another related topic, and then there's a few minutes and stuff for questions, as we've said before. Okay.
Thank you. Morning, everyone. Like Louise, this is my first time attending this. I'm usually on a zoology field course, so this is good for me in some ways. I'm going to be talking a little bit about my experience during the onset of COVID. Let's move forward. There we are. So this all took place with 3 weeks left of the semester and what turned out to be 1 week until the university shut down. So to reflect that slightly dramatic situation, I created a speed style introduction. people of a certain age might be thinking shoot the hostage, and everybody else is probably thinking that's maybe a little bit over dramatic for the time. Oh, I've lost my instructions again. My bar's gone. Ah, here we are. I think I just need to leave my cursor in the right place. Oh, I've got on to. There we are. Yeah, my bar keeps disappearing. Anyway, I had 3 considerations at this time. The first one were that there were specific learning outcomes associated with the practical element of the module, which I had to meet. I needed to maintain engagement during a particularly stressful time for the students. They didn't know what was happening or what was going to happen, and many of them were concerned about their families. And usually data that was collected during the practicals was used as part of the assessment. So I needed to provide some support to connect the 2 different aspects. Okay, so I chose to use Camtasia and Gin to solve these challenges. I hadn't used Camtasia before, but the interface was quite intuitive, as I found. It was software that the university already owned, so I had access to it through our network. I'm also one of those people who just basically just press things until they get stuck. And it turns out there's some really great tutorials available on YouTube that answered all my questions. So if I had any issues, I could address them quite quickly. So the module was a foundation level techniques in ecology module and was quite hands-on. This immediately led me to 2 main issues. Introductory level courses are usually associated with lower level cognitive skills, so things like remembering, recalling, but this one isn't. I tried to make it a little bit beyond that. Students prefer generally outdoor settings when they're identifying plants and invertebrates, and this was obviously going to be impossible. In these practicals, students practice development of a standardized approach, and they use key techniques for identifying groups in particular habitat. So specifically, they were doing an aquatic invert survey or pond dipping and analysing the data with a chi-squared. And they were also doing terrestrial invert surveying, which was basically looking at moth trapping and analysing their data with Shannon Diversity Index. So a little bit beyond what foundation level students usually do. The students usually build on these skills a little later in their degrees, and they're obviously practicing transferable skills during this practicals as well. So I created videos within my final week with help of PhD students, and I was able to edit and annotate them to emphasize particular techniques and methods for standardization. You can with, oops. Oh, go back. You can also use a range of different styles for labeling in Camtasia, so it's not all about these huge arrows that I've stuck on things. We all know the valuable interaction or how valuable interaction is for learning and the positive effects of learning engagement and persistence when we're using technology, and a lot of people have talked about that already to some degree. Camtasia addresses this by hosting a whole range of different media that you can add to your presentation with multiple quizzes that can be placed at any point as well. And this also addresses to some degree the effects of stress on the students' learning, as there allows them multiple viewing and quiz attempts. They can go back and forth within the presentation, and you can set it to allow them to redo the quiz over and over. So it's in some way supporting those negative effects on memory and recall. Just to lighten things for them a little bit, I did also try to find the worst possible music that I could to add in the beginning and end, with a few jokes here and there for them as well. So the quizzes can be used as a means of self-testing. So I added a quiz to the end of the presentation about moth trapping and a little bit of background information about moths themselves and main families and so on. And you can also add more complex interactions. So I included a dichotomous key that they could work through within the aquatic invert survey presentation. You can add direct feedback, so you can add instant feedback to any of the questions that they have, And you can also add more informative guidance. So if they get it wrong, you can add them a little bit of guidance so that when they have another go, hopefully they'll get it right next time. Presentation controls, as I said, allows students to repeat parts of the presentation as many times as they like. And quizzes can be integrated into our VLEs. We use Canvas at the moment, as they can be uploaded as a SCORM package, and they can be integrated as either graded or ungraded assignments, so whether they link directly to grading options within the VLE. And then you can add further assignment settings that allow you to set it as either formative or summative. You can control the number of times they can repeat the quizzes and the scoring method that determines their final mark, if that's something that's appropriate for you. Camtasia also allows you to do some screencasting or slide capture, and you can add narration as audio files to increase accessibility. You can also provide links to things like synchronous events, which is something that I did. I added a workshop that went through the data and how they calculate the various aspects they needed to for their assessment. So this helps develop higher level skills as well. So for the 2 assessments associated with the practicals, I found that there were no detrimental effects on their score between this year and last year's. And there was actually an increase in score in 1 assessment. And in my final evaluation of Camtasia, I found that it was obviously interactive. There were lots of opportunities for interactivity within the presentations and the way that they work. But obviously, it can't replace the fieldwork experience. Everybody's said that, and that's something that's very clear. But there were a few technological issues because you're creating it as a complete presentation that the students just play within the VLE. Creating the presentations could be quite time consuming. You can do quicker ones, but the more you add, the more complex it gets and the more time consuming it gets as a result. But the learning objects can be reused and updated, so you can constantly go in and edit them and then recreate that final SCORM package each time. The virtual methods will obviously help the students grasp the topics, but it is known that if by repetition you are limiting performance improvements as a result. There was no direct negative effect on performance, but longer term impacts can't be fully determined. So I don't know how that might affect their confidence or ability as they enter into year 1 next year. So that's just wrapping up there. Thanks everybody for listening. And I think we're going to a question session now.
That's great. Wendy, thank you very much. Just hearing a little feedback there, so I'm hoping people can hear me okay. I thank you very much for the 3 speakers for presenting there. There's been lots of questions throughout all 3 talks. So if you get a chance over the next few minutes or half an hour during lunch as well, go back through and have a look for the presenters. But we do have a few minutes for a bit more questions and stuff. And there's been quite a lot of topics and things coming up. So I'll maybe just, to be honest, I'm just going to cherry pick a few of them. Maybe one of the first ones that came in when Nick was speaking at the beginning was around the social dimension of some of these things. And Nick, you'd mentioned about the evening Zoom sessions, and that was something that got picked up on. So maybe you could comment a little bit about that. Have you had any of those sessions yet, or has anyone has that been going on?
It's been like pulling teeth. So definitely get them together for multiple briefings before you try and do anything online, because it just breaks the ice. The other thing we kind of recognized is lots of them haven't seen or spoken to each other for 5 months. And so that initial social anxiety was very much back, particularly among our first year students who haven't seen each other. We're starting to break the ice a little bit, but it's been really, really slow. Getting students to competently show their face when they're talking, mute their microphone when they're not, all those things has been way harder than we'd imagined. Again, I think it's because I've been doing this all summer in meetings about how we're going to manage the university next year. So actually what we then learned was if we shut up and left them on their own, they started to interact better. So we've actually been deliberately arriving to sessions late on Blackboard Collaborate Ultra, so that they've got 10 or 15 minutes with us go, oh, sorry, I'm running late. No, we're not. We're just letting them warm up a bit. because the silence when we first started was deathly.
Yeah, that's nice. It's a good technique to do the social engineering for sure. I'm sure that's been picked up as well. There were a few other questions. I'll try and pick up some from the chat as well. Let me just see. Yeah, I mean, the second, both Louise and Wendy were both commenting around some of the assessment stuff. And Louise, I was really interested in the use of engagement and trying to assess that. You mentioned it is quite difficult. I mean, I think that's something that we've looked at a little bit at the OU as well, and I think it is really difficult. How do the students kind of engage with that process? Do they feel, is it authentic? Are they aware of being assessed in that way? I don't know if you're able to answer that.
Yes, I am. Yeah, so I mean, we made it clear at the start of the course that they would be assessed on their level of engagement, and we put out the rubric and so on. So I think someone in the chat asked about, for the Shire students, was that more of an issue? And I think if you're trying to assess engagement in class, then it certainly is, and you'll get some people who are quite happy to say a lot, but it might not have that much substance, whereas it's harder for Shire people to maybe speak up. But we felt that with the using the written discussion boards, then there was the opportunity for people to sort of think about what they wanted to say first before actually posting it. But probably there was still an element for Shire people to be just a little bit more reticent about posting their opinions. So there probably is still that personality effect there, actually. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I thought your rubric was really interesting because it gave a bit of structure around that, so it wasn't, I think that is quite a good way to try to counterbalance the kind of personality effect stuff. Yeah, I thought
yes. I mean, we did also look at the number of posts, but really we did concentrate on quality over quantity. But obviously quantity comes into it too, but to a lesser extent.
Of course. No, brilliant. Right, let me just, mindful of the time now. I know we are running a little bit late, but I wanted to make sure that everyone got their allocated slots. Any other questions? Anyone else want to help me out on anything from the presenters? Brilliant. Maybe I could ask a little question. Wendy, if you've got just a minute before we move on. Wendy, when you were using the Camtasia, how much of it, the process of embedding that, you had quizzes and stuff as well there. The process of putting all that together, it looks great, and quite a a nice design in terms of getting the students to engage with and be active in the process. Was it a lot of was it complicated to put together? You mentioned that you delivered it through the Canvas VLE.
I was quite surprised how easy it was. I say I'm, a little bit of a technophile and like new things. I'd never used it before and just kind of started throwing all these different media at it. Somebody earlier mentioned the problem with recording outside, so we ended up doing separate audio files and putting them with the videos, but Camtasia just lets you overlay everything on top of each other, so you can have these annotations. It's really easy to do, and you can expand the timeline and contract it, so you can get sort of nitty-gritty bits of time and decide exactly where the annotations are going to appear and disappear, and where your quizzes are going to appear and disappear. It is really easy to manipulate, but you can get, I think you can spend a lot of time on it, but you don't have to.
Sure. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I better finish up, but there will be more questions, I'm sure. So please follow up with things in the chat as well, and do get in touch